Hey everybody, have you guys been watching The White Lotus? Because I have, and so have 500,000 other people every week. The White Lotus is an HBO limited series written, created, and directed by Mike White, who until recently I thought was a random actor who peaked in School of Rock. The White Lotus is essentially a dark satire about rich people problems, and watching it is stress-inducing, thanks in large part to the music. It seems that everybody who's watched the show is in a love-hate relationship with Cristobal Tapia de Veer's score. Look at all this stuff from Twitter. What is it about this music that makes us feel so anxious? Well, I transcribed the main theme to try to figure that out, and in this video I'm going to share with you what I found. This is Score Study with me, briankrock.
Part 1. Animal Instincts.
Mike White has said that he was looking for the music to have a feeling of tropical anxiety, and clearly he called Tapia de Veer because eerie music kind of became that guy's brand after he did the award-winning score for Utopia in 2013. Cristobal is a classically trained percussionist, and his assortment of percussion instruments play a central role in the sound palette of much of his musical output, including The White Lotus. Apparently, he started just by improvising grooves, and slowly the vibe started to emerge. To me, the single most inspired thing about this music is the use of vocal samples to evoke sort of vague animal-y / monkey noises, as well as orgasmic moans. These two auditory symbols emphasize the main themes of the show. We hear them before we know a single detail about the plot, and yet we sort of intuit the gist of what's about to take place. Tapia de Veer wanted the music to evoke a zoo. I think all the sounds, whether it's the monkey sounds or the screaming and stuff like that, it's all about making these people feel like it's a jungle or some kind of zoo. There are moments where the music is kind of laughing at the characters. There is some toying with making these people feel like a bunch of chimpanzees. It somehow brings out what might be happening in their heads, I think. So check this out, guys. I wanted to see if I could sort of recreate the MIDI mapping of the sample that I think Cristobal used. Okay, check this out, guys. I've opened up Contact Player. Now I'm gonna go into the mapping editor and drag in, if I can find it, monkey.wave, and then just spread it out over the whole keyboard. Now, listen to what this sounds like. So I really think that's basically exactly what Cristobal did here. If you're curious, I was inspired to recreate these sounds acoustically by using something on my woodwind instruments called timbral trills. I experimented with putting different combinations of keys down to oscillate back and forth between two notes of approximately the same pitch, but of starkly different timbres. Anyways, songwriters have been sampling animal sounds for a really long time, but this case is special to me because the animal sounds are both motivated by and emphasize the themes of the show. We are observing these very rich people at a distance and with very little empathy, almost as if we are observing them like animals in a cage. And on top of that, they're kind of acting like animals. They're motivated by their basest instincts: money, power, sex. Tapia de Veer's score also does a really good job of establishing the setting for the show, and I think he was clearly inspired, at least in part, by exotica, a sort of niche genre of music that was somewhat popular in the 1950s and 1960s. This style of music gets its name from an album that was made in 1957 by Martin Denny, who described the music as a combination of the South Pacific and the Orient. What a lot of people imagine the islands to be like. It's pure fantasy, though. Let's emphasize those words. It's pure fantasy. Exotica music relies heavily on an assortment of percussion instruments from Asia and Latin America and Africa, as well as the sounds of animals like monkeys, or shrieks and moans and guttural cries. Things like that, which sort of evoke the imagined idea of a jungle in a Westerner's mind, but which really kind of have nothing to do with the actual cultures of those places. And it's actually for that very reason that I think exotica makes a great musical touchstone for Tapia de Veer's score, because the characters in the show are experiencing the islands of Hawaii from within the confines of a private resort. Hotel employees entertain the guests with like luau's and whatnot, and the rooms and the decorations evoke the flora and fauna of the jungle, but they're very far removed from those things. Nevertheless, the atmosphere portends a truly ritualistic sacrifice of some kind. So Earthsat's tropical music is actually a pretty apt metaphor.
Part 2. Ritual of the Savage.
Beyond the surface level elements of the production decisions that so clearly and elegantly establish the tone and the setting of the show, there's also a lot under the surface within the pitches and rhythms that I think does a lot to establish feelings of anxiety and dread in this music. When we first hear the melody, it isn't fleshed out with any kind of harmony or bass notes or anything that'll orient us around what's happening. So instead, the listener is sort of invited to predict what's going to happen, allowing Tapia de Veer to toy with us. The melody begins simply: D, C sharp, D, B. This is stock horror score fare. It's just the first three notes of a B minor scale. And it stays there for a long time. 14 out of the first 16 beats of the song are dedicated just to sort of establishing these three notes. And then in the last two beats of a 4-bar phrase, Tapia de Veer swiftly adds a lot of musical information. Here's where the big change happens. There's G, D, C sharp, and then F sharp, B. This melody here, G, D, C sharp, outlines a tritone, and this F sharp sounds a lot, to me, played in the timpani, sounds a lot like 5-1. So immediately I'm thinking that the song is going to proceed something like, with a 5 chord. Put a pin in that for a second. After that, a counter melody is introduced. B, G, B, F sharp. Again, this emphasizes the tritone between C sharp and G, because when it's played at the same time as the original melody, you get. So now that we've heard this tritone a bunch of times, C sharp and G, I'm sure this is going to be a diminished 7th triad. Like an A sharp diminished 7th chord, the 7 leading to 1. And then, this is a very subtle detail, but it's really unsettling to me. When the groove kicks in at letter B in my transcription, which, by the way, if you want to look at my transcription, the scores for all my videos are available on my Patreon page. But anyways, when the groove kicks in, we hear the melody, but this time it's the counter melody. You know, when I'm like walking around my apartment whistling this, I keep being confused. Like, wait, what is the melody? Does it go dee doo dee doo, or does it go doo doo dee doo doo dee doo dee doo? Like, I forget. I can't remember because they're both the melody. They're equally the melody. It's just kind of confusing. Zing, 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 zing. Again, to reiterate, this is all just very subtle, subconscious, super cool stuff that Tapia de Veer probably didn't do purposefully, but which is just evident in the music to me. Then what's crazy is that 30 seconds into the piece of this minute-long excerpt, so a long way in, we finally start hearing some chords played in the pizzicato strings. And they are very surprising, at least to me. They're like the exact opposite of what I was expecting based on what I heard in the melody. Let me just play a little bit for you so you can hear it. B minor, F sharp minor, the minor 5, E minor. So remember how I was expecting to hear the 5 chord, or like a F sharp 7 flat 9. Something like that. I was expecting to hear a major, dominant 7, flat 9, something like that, 5 chord. But instead, we get a minor 5. Now, this isn't an uncommon chord progression by any stretch of the imagination. It's just that it sounds weird with this melody, at least to me. I'm not sure what it is that imbues music with apprehension, but I know it when I feel it, and I have a feeling that it's a very personal thing. So I asked all of you guys on social media to tell me examples of music that fill you with dread and anxiety, to see if I could find some sort of common thread between them. And it was all over the place. It seems that for some people, the content of the lyrics is the key. Demented, subversive, evil topics conjure up mental images or thoughts of dread and fear. And then for some people, just pure noise makes them anxious. Lots of scratchy sounds or dense textures, painfully high or low frequencies. And then for others, it seems to have something to do with the tempo or the speed or the rate at which the music proceeds. Music that is disorientingly slow or just so fast that you feel like you can't hang on makes people feel anxious. But then Tapia de Veer's music has no lyrics. It's really pleasant to listen to, and it goes at a very groovy mid-tempo. So what's so unsettling about it then? I think it's just a combination of factors. I mean, obviously, the sound palette and the subtle interplay of the themes of the show, The White Lotus, have a lot to do with it. There's unquantized percussion that's kind of messy. There's slightly out of tune melodies. There's animal sound samples and things like that. All those surface level elements certainly do a lot to add to the overall atmosphere of uneasiness. But what I'm also trying to suggest here is that Tapia de Veer used his good taste and intuition to withhold details and defy listeners' expectations. This is subtle, and it's subliminal. Like, I'm sure Cristobal wasn't consciously thinking to himself, all right, now at this point, I'm really gonna fuck with the minds of the listeners. No, he was just writing and being creative and letting it flow. But nevertheless, I think his music has unsettled so many listeners because of his virtuosic ability to toy with our expectations. And I think the show, The White Lotus, wouldn't be nearly as unnerving as it is without his score, which is probably the biggest compliment that you could give somebody who's written a soundtrack. It really makes the show. All right, so that's it for today, everybody. Thanks for sticking around and listening, and I hope you learned something. Let me know what you think in the comments and all that other shit that I'm supposed to say. Please click like and subscribe, and check out my Patreon, and click the bell, and tell your friends, and share the video, and whatever else. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you soon. I got a bunch of videos in the works that I'm excited about. Please stay healthy.